so my parents have never been together a day in my life, and so they were young. My mom was 19, my dad was 18 when I was born, and so anyway, so that kind of sets the tone for certain things throughout my childhood, and so and then.
This episode is brought to you by Zing Media Co. Zing is a social media marketing company that helps small to medium-sized companies and organizations that want to make a positive impact in their communities. If you're in need of social media marketing, then reach out to Zing. Contact the team at zingmediaco.com.
Hey everyone, my name is George Orihinalis. I'm the executive producer of Saved and Tatted and the creator of Radio Faith. If you've been following Charles and the Saved and Tatted show for a while, then you know that this show used to be on the Radio Faith YouTube channel. But you're here now and you see that Saved and Tatted has its own channel. Saved and Tatted is still part of the Radio Faith family, but Charles and I have been planning some new things for SNT, which means it's going to grow and it needs its own digital space. Also, Radio Faith is making plans to produce 2 new shows, which will be part of the Radio Faith family alongside SNT. I'll tell you more about those 2 new shows at the end of this episode. Thanks for taking the time to check out Saved and Tatted. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell to be notified when new episodes drop. Go ahead and let us know what you think about this episode in the comment section. And if you think someone else needs to check it out, then click the share button and send them the link. Thanks again for checking out the episode. Now I'm going to stop talking because I know you're here to listen to Charles. God bless.
Hey guys, welcome to the Saved and Tatted podcast, man. I'm glad to have y'all back. I hope y'all been following season 2. I got Micah here with me today. Man, so this is the first person I've had on here who I can't say that, we've hung out or we're friends or anything. Yeah. We've met through the producer, George, who he's been on the podcast a couple times. So tell me about yourself, man.
Yeah, so, like you said, my name is Micah. So I actually get to serve in full-time ministry. I'm a student and missions pastor at Calvary Baptist Church here in Rosenberg, and so been doing that for just this past week. It's 7 years that I've been doing that, which is kind of surreal for me. I don't feel like I'm old enough to have been serving somewhere for 7 years straight already, but yeah. So anyway, that's what I do. I get to work with students 6th through 12th grade, and then also serve in our missions ministry and lead that area of the church.
That's awesome,
so,
man.
Yeah.
So how did you get into that, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, man, that's so really kind of crazy. So I grew up, I love sports. That was kind of my passion. That was what I really wanted to do with my life, whether it was broadcasting or writing or coaching, something in that world. But when I was like 16 years old, I was at youth camp, and God began to place some on my heart that I really didn't understand then, and especially at 16, didn't want. And so anyway, God began to place on my heart some kind of call to something greater. And so anyway, I took some time to figure out what that was going to look like and how that would play out. But after coming home and kind of talking with my youth pastor and some other people that were important, and my grandpa and some other people in my life, just kind of begin to figure out what that would look like. And ultimately, God led me to Houston Baptist University, or formerly known as Houston Baptist University, now Houston Christian University. Take a little while to get used to that. But yeah, it led me there, and it was a great experience. And while I was there, God opened some doors through a professor of mine that had a relationship with the church here.
Oh, okay, cool.
And kind of opened an opportunity for me to come. And that really was a unique time because I was in a season of tragedy, maybe the biggest loss that I'd ever had in my life, right before I ended up at the church. So when I got to college, when I got to HBU, I went with 2 of my friends from high school that I knew well. We had ended up there, and the week leading the weekend right before finals in 2015, December 2015. One of my close friends, who was one of my roommates, committed suicide on campus.
Oh, man.
And so I really was in kind of a dark place, didn't really know what direction I was going to go and how to respond to that. And it's a weird kind of conflicting time because, I also got, engaged that same month. And so, there were, exciting things going on, but then also this loss that I couldn't explain and couldn't understand, because it was, not only was he a great friend, he was also like one of the strongest believers I'd ever met. And
Really?
and so it was just like, it didn't make sense. Like, it was confusing for me. And so out of that tragedy, God had kind of opened this opportunity with a professor of mine, and built a relationship that, I'd had him for several classes and had a good rapport with him that way. But he took the time to kind of pour into me and another roommate of mine who's a close friend. And it just to love on us and care for us, and really kind of built a relationship there that was maybe beyond just like, your typical go hear a lecture in a class kind of relationship, and really showed that it cared for us. And so a month or so later, I'm at school and in a mini semester in January, and I see that the professor that's teaching that class wrote on the board that there was a church that was looking for somebody, and if you were interested, to contact this professor that I had gotten to be close with, over, a month or so before that. And so, anyway, I went and talked to him in his office, and, here we are 7 years later. But, like, it really is kind of crazy how out of one of the darkest times in my life, and really having no idea where I was going to go forward, God used that moment, used that time to draw me closer to somebody who introduced me to the place that now is a second family for me, and even awesome. My wife and my daughter. And so,
It goes and shows you that God just pulls the good out of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
that's awesome, man. So I know you said HBU. So I'm in the process of trying to get in at HBU right now, so that I can start for theological studies. So I'm praying on that. Yeah. It being the Saved and Tatted podcast. Yeah. I think about it. I feel bad for any of those people who got an HBU tattoo.
It is no longer relevant.
It's not HBU anymore.
Maybe it's like a classic, It's
like
my diploma feels the same way too. Like it's like it's an antique now. It's like sitting there. And
it's like those people that got Oilers tattoos, and now it's like the Titans. But George, do you have a Liberty tattoo on your sleeve?
Yeah.
No, but that's man, that's awesome. Do you have any tattoos?
No, so I don't but I love tattoos, like, weirdly, to not have tattoos. And so, like, I think my problem is, for one, like I mentioned, I work at a church, been in a church for a long time, and I work at a Southern Baptist church. And so, like, and I grew up in churches where, like, tattoos have always been kind of, there's always people on both sides of the fence, right, or whatever, but it's somewhat controversial or whatever. And so, anyway, so, like, I think, like, sometimes or whatever, that was part of what put the brakes on. But the older I've gotten, I think it's less that, and just, like, I think if I went into the tattoo world, like, I want, like, a full sleeve, like, and all, full and body. Like, and that's a lot of money, that's a lot of time, and, like, because, like, I think y'all have talked about this before too. Like, I think the older you get, maybe the more thought you might put into, like, because George has talked about this before too. Like, whatever you put there is staying there, like, unless you're gonna go through a long, painful process to get it removed. But like, and so now it's like, I feel like I just overthink it. Like, I'm gonna put.
It's easier just not to get it.
Yeah, like, and so if somebody like wants to donate to the like Micah Get a Tattoo Fund and like pay for, because I'm also all the tattoo like Instagram pages that I follow and stuff. These dudes, it's like $500 an hour. Like, it's like, and so
that's like a lot of times when I first started, I would follow these tattoo artists that were like overseas and like in Australia, and like these tattoo artists that have been on like on TV and everything. They're in magazines. And so I'm like, oh man, like that tattoo idea looks so amazing. I think I want to go get that tattoo. And then I go get it from like a local tattoo artist here. Yeah. And it looks nothing like what I thought it was going to look like. But I don't regret any of mine. I will say that they are addicting though. Oh, yeah. So I don't see how those people can go and just get one.
Yeah, and be done for good.
And just be done. Like I can't do that. But they are expensive. Yeah. And they're, like you said, how you wanted them all over your body. So I got this tattoo, and it took up my arm, and I was like, man, I like the whole sleeve look. I want to do this. Yeah. I'm not even done on this side. Like I still got like 11 hours. I got like 11 hours left on here. It needs to be darker. Like this was just like an outline, but because I had this arm done, I'm like, I gotta go to this arm now. Yeah. And then so I put all my money into this arm, and now this one's done. Yeah. I was going to go back to this one, but I'm like, nah, you know what? Let me get my neck. So then I went to my neck. And
well, then it's like, it's one of those things too. It's like, if I feel like, because I've never gotten one, I still don't know, like, what's the pain like? What's all that sort of stuff? But if I break through one and I'm good, then it's like, all right, then where do I stop? And so who knows?
I will tell you this: don't ever ask a girl who has tattoos if they're painful.
Yeah.
Girls hold that their pain tolerance
Yeah.
is so much higher than ours. My wife is little.
Oh yeah.
My wife is like 100 pounds soaking wet, and
Yeah.
she has a tattoo that goes down the spine of her back. And
That made me cringe. Just
they
like
did.
thinking about it.
They did a tattoo on my back, and it's just the upper part of my back. And it was by far probably the most painful tattoos I have, other than my butt tattoo. I got a butt tattoo. That one was pretty bad.
Yeah. No.
But it's just the meat, bro.
Yeah.
It's the meat
I
back
got
there.
a lot of meat back there. I don't know if that's the spot that I can go.
Yeah,
for
that
a
one.
tattoo, so.
That one was pretty brutal.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, and I get it though.
Yeah.
I know that you say like you were worried about what the church you're going to
Yeah.
would think and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's been something that was something that I thought about while in church, because so I got a couple tattoos right before I was saved, and then once I got into church, I actually got more tattoos
Yeah.
at the same time of me diving deeper into church. And so the only thing that really altered the whole tattoo experience is that all of mine are religious. Like,
Yeah.
The Alpha and Omega, faith, the anchor, God's will on my knuckles. I got a child of God on the back of my arm. Like, so everything is kind of like more.
Yeah, the directions maybe shifted a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I got a military tattoo on here, and then, I thought about getting pinups, and then I thought about like this whole skulls and the fire and everything. And then I'm kind of glad I didn't go that route just because of where my life has gone since then.
Yeah.
But I know me and you had spoke a little bit before we started today, and you had talked about how just your upbringing is a little bit different than those who are in ministry.
Yeah.
And we talked about, I had told you, man, it's kind of like judging a book by its cover.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, like, it works kind of both ways, because people look at me and they're like, there's no way that guy's,
Yeah.
I get that I can come off or look like someone who may not be saved, or just a little, I'm not going to say intimidated, because those who are friends and family are going to be like, oh, you're not intimidated.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. So, but, I
Yeah,
get
but
it.
to the random stranger.
Yeah. I'm intimidating, KJ. You're scared of me.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. But then there's also the other aspect of, okay, you see someone who isn't tatted, who went to school for, whether it be theology or biblical studies or anything, you automatically assume, okay, well, these people, this person has his life together. He doesn't know what real struggle is and stuff like that. But you're telling me that, one of the darkest times you ever had was while you were in school.
Yeah.
And I know how rough that can be, losing a friend to suicide. My actual pastor, the way that he became my pastor was one of my best friends, who was actually the guy who introduced me or helped me introduce me to my wife now. He committed suicide. And my pastor, Pastor Derek from Purpose Church, he's the one who actually did his funeral service. Okay. And that's how I met him, and that's how I ended, we've been at Purpose for almost 2 years now, and so that's how that relationship started. So I get that, God can pull that goodness out of dark places and stuff, but, tell me a little bit about your story, because, I'm pretty intrigued on it.
Yeah, so, like you said, like, I'm like, I feel like a pretty average looking, like, late 20s white guy who's in ministry. And so, like, a lot of people can make, like, assumptions. I went to private Christian university and that sort of stuff. And so people kind of piece the puzzle together on their own a lot of times anyway. And so, but I think my story is a lot different than what a lot of people would think. And so, like, I guess I can go all the way back to the beginning, and then I'll try to move quickly. But so for one, like, so my parents have never been together a day in my life. And so, they were young. My mom was 19. My dad was 18 when I was born. And so, anyway, so that kind of sets the tone for certain things throughout my childhood. And so, and then go a little bit later, my mom, when I was about 3 or so years old, meets who is now my sister, her dad, gets in a relationship there. And then my sister's born when I'm about 5. But that relationship was not always great. It was not always healthy. There was abuse. There were things that not towards me, but towards my mom, and having to watch those sort of things. And so it's, as a young kid, to kind of see that type of stuff, and then to go to church and to hear these things, it was a hard thing to like reconcile, like, and to reason. And I feel like for a young kid, I was a pretty big thinker. I was trying to figure that stuff out already. I got saved when I was 5 years old, so like I'd been in the church. I knew those things. My grandpa was a pastor of a small church. He was bivocational, and so, but I was, I grew up on one hand from the time I can remember sitting on the front pew, listening to my grandpa preach. There's a reason I still sit on the front pew in church today, because it's been the spot I've set my whole life. Like that's home to me. But then on the other side, like there was this other part of my life that was happening behind the scenes that a lot of people didn't know, people at school didn't know about. Some of my closest friends and, people that I would confide in and sort of, might have known some of those things. But anyway, so kind of grew up there. And then my dad, when I was real young, didn't really have much of a relationship with him. I knew who he was, like, you know what I mean? And I'd seen him, and we would see each other. But when I was really young, we weren't super close. And then, by the time I was in school, I was seeing him and getting to spend a little more time. I mean, remember, my parents are super young, so like they were still kind of getting their lives together and stuff too. And so by the time I'm in school, we're seeing each other, we're spending time together. But the relationship was still different, right? Like I was super close with my mom because that was who I lived with and stuff. And so, and so then when I was 5 years old, almost, or maybe 6, somewhere in there, it's hard to remember, but my mom had actually tried to take her own life shortly after my sister was born. And so I ended up going and living with my dad for a few years, which was kind of a unique experience because, like, I knew him and I knew he's my dad and I had a relationship with him, but, like, not in the sense of, like, seeing him every day and, like, living with him.
Household,
like, that's a different environment. And so, and ultimately, I lived with him for a few years and moved back home in, like, 4th grade with my mom. And anyway, and so, and in that time, like, definitely was not in church on a regular basis when I was living with my dad. So my dad was not a Christian, I can get to that in a little bit because that's also a big part of my story. But my dad, he was not a Christian. He did not go to church, like, had a little bit of, like, his parents, had some different church backgrounds. His dad went to Catholic school growing up and stuff, but kind of was a little bit more distant from the church too, I think, as an adult. And then, and so anyway, my mom's side of the family was heavily involved in the church. Her dad is my grandpa that was a pastor. And so kind of those two different worlds. But anyway, and so I wasn't in church a lot, like during those years that I was with him, except for when I would go back home to my mom and stuff. And then, I moved back home, and my grandpa was still pastoring, I think, at the time, or at least involved in some small churches. And then, anyway, we went to church more regularly there. But then got into, like, my junior high years, and we were a lot less consistent, and I felt like we were kind of in this spot of, like, I still had this foundation of faith. Right? My grandpa was this great faith pillar in our family. My grandma, all the way, even generations back from that on my mom's side, had some really strong pillars of faith. My great-grandma is like the true matriarch. She died, 40 years before I was born, but I've heard the legacies my whole life, right?
Stories.
Like, like she prayed for her family, like, to be leaders in ministry and to lead people to God. And from her to my generation, there's something like 18 pastors in our family.
Oh, wow.
And so, like, so there's, like, this strong legacy right on this side, and then on the other side of my family, something different. And then also my experience in the moment being much different than some of that too. And so anyway, growing up and having that abuse stayed in the home until right about just before high school is when my mom and him separated. And so those kind of experiences really shaped a lot of who I was at that age. And I think when you're that age, you respond in two different ways. Like, some people, they fall into those same patterns because that's all they know, and that's, like, the example that's been set for them. And then I think for others, you go the exact opposite. And that was where I think I fell. Like, I was just like, I don't know how to explain this. I don't know why I've had to go through this. I don't know why my mom's had to go through this. I don't know why she keeps going back to this, and staying in this situation. I don't know how to answer all those questions. But all I know is that when I'm old enough to choose, I don't ever want to do this. Yeah. And so, and I want my life to look a lot different than that. And so I think that was something that motivated me, that kept me driven, like even in difficult circumstances. And when and kind of fast forwarding to where, once God calls me to ministry, like that was a big part of what drove me to push and overcome obstacles. I was a kid that didn't come from money, and I mean, if you're trying to get into HBU, it's not the cheapest place in the world. And so I'll be paying that place for like the rest of my life. I think, that and my mortgage are probably about the same length. And so, but I think I never was deterred, because I was like, I can't fall into anything like what I grew up in. Like, I don't want that. And that's not to say like I had incredible people, my mom, my grandpa, and my dad, as I got older, that were huge influences on my life and positive. But there were also things that I'm like, I don't want my kids to experience this. I don't want. Yeah.
Did you ever pull away as far as running from God? Like, I know high school and, you get in junior high after. I've never had that experience of being able to be a part of a church or be in a religious or faith-filled family.
Yeah.
And then experience that my whole life. It wasn't until later in life where we would attend church, but it was like periodically on holidays and stuff like that. Do you think that because church was such a big part of your life when you were younger, that when you did enter that junior high and high school years, that you were like, now that I have a choice and now that I've experienced what happens behind the closed doors, something is off-putting about church?
So yes and no. So I'm not someone who's deterred, or if I believe something or whatever my convictions are, I tend to be pretty strong in them. And so I never was shaken on my belief in God and I think the need for church. If anything, there were, and part of, I guess, maybe what helped me in this is some of the worst times at home, I could always kind of equate those with times that we were less involved in the church and we were less involved. And so maybe I was still holding on to this hope of okay, well, if maybe that does correlate, maybe some of these things are going worse because we're not as involved. Yeah. And so I think I still held on to some of that. But there were definitely times where I was frustrated with God. Oh, yeah. Not so much necessarily about the church and that, because I think there was something in me pretty early that saw the value in that community and that family. Church was an escape for me a lot in my life. Yeah. I looked forward to going there because it got me out of the house. It got me away from other things. So when I was there, I didn't have to think about, what was happening at home, because it was a safe place. Yeah, it was a safe place for me. And so I think I always saw value in that part of community there. But there were times where I was frustrated with God that why am I having to learn this way, right? Why am I having to go through this sort of situation? But I can look back now, being in student ministry, and see the value in that, because there's experiences that I had then that didn't make any sense. That didn't seem to have any value now. I think I heard you talk about this earlier, about that our testimony is not necessarily for us, but for other people. And I think I see that carry out a lot too. Now that being to work with students, my story, the things that I've struggled through and God has brought me through, it's not just about me. It's now I get to share that and encourage them, and they can see, okay, and somebody maybe I look up to, or maybe somebody I trust, they've walked through this. God has carried them through this kind of season as well. And so, anyway, yeah. So that is the church. I guess I never had the animosity or the pushback towards. But there were definitely times where I struggled with why God was allowing me to go through certain situations.
And I think everyone deals with that, even those who have it all together, and those who don't. You really don't see those people that do struggle. I think there's certain situations that happen, because I if you look at it, the way I see it is there's always going to be a reason to be upset at God.
Yeah.
You don't go to church, and you see other people who do go to church, and those people who do go to church post nothing but their highlight reel on social media. Yeah. So it's oh, well, why do they get to have such a great life, and why do I have to live in this storm of a life where I'm having to live paycheck to paycheck, or I'm having to deal with abusive relationship, whether being in one or watching one, And then you have those other people who do go to church all the time, and then they go and get upset at God because they're seeing other people in their church who are doing a lot better than them.
Yeah.
And it's like that whole comparison kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's very difficult for someone, whether it be someone who's been in church their whole life or someone who's just new to it, to go through a walk with God and not at some point in that walk to be like, why?
Yeah.
You know, why is it that I'm having to deal with this? Why is it that my walk is harder than these other people?
Yeah.
And I think that's one reason why it is so important for people to be so vulnerable and outspoken about their testimonies, because it allows other people to see a side of someone that most people probably don't get to witness that too often.
Yeah, because like the social media culture that we live in, right? Like nobody's like putting the worst version of themselves out there, right? Like, and so we start to live in this world where we believe that everybody else's life actually looks like what their Instagram feed looks like, or and so, or whatever the latest TikTok trend is and how much fun they're having. That's the full picture of their life in a lot of people's mind. But the reality is those people have struggles too.
Oh, yeah.
Those people, and so I think it is important. It's valuable to share, to remind people that they're not alone. I think, man, like working with teenagers, and I think adults do this too, but it's so easy for us to kind of like back ourselves into this corner to think that we're the only person experiencing the struggles that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah.
Like, and like, I have nobody to talk to because nobody understands me. Like, that's like, I think a teenager's favorite phrase is nobody understands me, which is the most insane statement ever, right? Because like all these generations that came before you just happen to live something that no one else has. And I think that's the thing is, though, that so many adults in their lives haven't been vulnerable to share the struggles that they're having or that they had at their age or they're continuing to have now. And so, like, if we aren't willing to share that story, if we're not willing to talk about those things, then we are contributing in some way to making those people feel isolated.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of the beauty of the church, right, is like you have this place where people can come together, be vulnerable, share what they're going through, what they're struggling with, and walk with each other through that. Like, you know what I mean? And so I think that's why God created us for community. He didn't create us to walk through this stuff alone.
Of course, man. It's all about relationships, not just with him, but with other people.
Yeah.
You know, do you think that because of the type of, the way your life went, and because you were sometimes judged by the way that you look or you carry yourself, being in youth and being over teenagers, do you sometimes pick out the ones who seem like they have it all together and be like, I know something's got to be going on behind them? Or is it more of a just, hey, you got struggles, I've had struggles, come to me, let me know? Because that's one of the reasons why I've always had I don't want to say a hard time with youth, but I've always had a hard time getting to them. And the reason for that is I put myself in the mindset of, I remember when I was a teenager and nothing anyone could tell me would ever pull me from whatever it was that I was doing, because you don't know my life, you don't know what I'm going through. So I know that mindset that they're in. And then you grow up and you realize, like, man, I was wrong this whole entire time. Yeah. And so for me as an adult, all I want to do is be like, look, you are wrong. Yeah. Like, I understand what you're going through, whether you believe it or not. Yeah. I've been there before. I know your mindset. Yeah. And so it's kind of hard for me to translate that kind of communication to someone who's a teenager. Yeah. How do you go about doing that? Because I have a teenager, I have a daughter, and she's in high school. Yeah. And our communication she lives in California with her mom. Yeah. And so we only get to talk over phone and then like occasionally whenever she comes to visit for the holidays. Yeah. So I would like to get your insight on how you approach. Yeah. So I think with your own kids, it's a whole nother challenge, right? Because you can say the exact same thing that I could then come behind you and say, but and she would listen to me and not you. Like, and so that happens sometimes, I think. I was listening to a podcast earlier this week, and Tony Hawk was talking about his own kids and his, like, Tony Hawk, greatest, arguably the greatest skateboarder of all time. And he's talking about like his boys. He has 5 boys and a girl, but specifically about his boys and skating, and that like he would try to tell them something, they would like not want to listen to him, but then they would take the advice. That's how crazy kids are with their parents sometimes. Like, your dad's Tony Hawk. Like, if anybody's giving you skating advice, guys, like, this is the dude you should listen to. But instead, you're going to listen to Jim Bob over here instead of Tony Hawk. And so, like, sometimes that's just like teenager logic when it comes to our parents. Yeah. But on just a more generic kind of like way, I think that it's important to communicate with them. So like for me, what I've found to be valuable is developing that relationship, right? Like, so I can't walk into a room and like
how I was saying people could look at me and assume different things. I can't walk into a room and just look at these kids and assume or decide what I think they're living in and what they're going through. And so I just really try to take time to get to know kids and earn trust. I found like in our culture today, like kids are so much slower to trust. Even in I'm 29, like, you know, and even in the time since I've been in school, like the shift from like what it takes for a teenager to trust an adult or somebody else, anyone really, like, is a whole nother level. Like, and I guess maybe it's just because the amount of information and false information and all these different sources and things that they take in, that like it really takes time to build trust. And so I really do. I just try to put in that time to build relationships, to get to know them, to hear them, listen to, like, become a better listener and hear what they see to be their experience.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing too, is like, one of the things I try to help parents with is, as adults, like you were talking about a while ago, when you talk to a teenager now, you just want to tell them because you've been there and you see, well, we have perspective. That's the word to kind of describe that, right? Like we have a more perspective or a broader perspective because we've already lived through their shoes. We've gone in and out of the storms that they're in right now that they think will never end. Like we've been out of those and gone through whole new ones and things that are much bigger or whatever. And so like as an adult, we have this perspective that I think students or teenagers often don't have, just for the sheer sake of how long they've lived, right? Like, so the things that they're going through feel like they're going to last forever. And so I try to be understanding to that and listen and take the time to hear what, and I think this even goes with adults too sometimes, but really just like let people share what they perceive to be happening, what they think they're happening, because that's going to give me a lens into what is really going on and how I can walk into that. And I do feel like some of this, everybody has different gifting too, right? Like not everybody is gifted to be able to like communicate, you know, working. It takes another level of patience and compassion to like deal with teenagers. And so like there are people over the years in student ministry that have, you know, wanted to volunteer, and after seeing them with students for a little bit, like you kind of have to kindly ask, like, I don't know if this is the right role for it. Yeah, because like there is some sort of skill set to it, but I do think a big part is just listening and hearing where they are, like knowing where they, like, yeah, maybe I do have some wisdom to share with them, but trying to find where's the lane that I can.
How to connect with them.
Yeah, for sure.
I know that you had said that, you know, you met your wife, correct me if I'm wrong, at your church.
Yeah, so growing
after,
up.
So
yeah.
We
met at church in high school. So
church in high school.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, so
yeah.
Did she go to HBU with you as well, or
for 1 year, yes, and then her dad had to have a pretty serious brain surgery, and so she moved back home, and helped out at the house and stuff for a year. Went to community college, and then kind of took the long route to finish school after that. But yeah, so we actually met. We've been together. What is 2023? This year will be 12 years that we've been together. Been married for 6 years this year. So
that's awesome.
Yeah,
man. That's good.
So yeah,
it's a good track record.
Yeah, yeah.
So with y'all meeting in high school and everything, did she understand your background and your story and where you came from and how? Because I'm assuming that if she went to HBU as well, was her life a church life as well? Yeah.
So she grew up in church. Her parents took them from a pretty young age. And so the church that I got involved with when I moved here, which is kind of a crazy story how that happened, and we can get into that if you want. But like she had been going there for some time before I got there. And then even before that, her parents had been taking her from pretty young. Now, neither one of her dad grew up, I think, in church a little bit more than her mom. But like they had decided when they had kids that they wanted to raise them in church. And so she had been going to church most of her life. And so, and her parents helped volunteer and were pretty involved in the church when she was young. That didn't mean, but that also didn't mean that life was perfect for her either. You know what I mean? They had their struggles too, and different things. But yeah, so she knew like where I came from. I was on the leadership team in the student ministry that we were a part of and stuff. And so, that was honestly some of that is the reason we're together today. So we started kind of talking while we were at youth camp one year, which is the same youth camp that we still bring our students back to.
That's
today.
where it always happens at.
Yeah, man,
camp,
I know.
Bro.
Like, yeah, God been playing Cupid at youth camp, and so like it's, but no, it was fun. So like two of our best friends were dating, and so we naturally then spent a lot of time around each other at that camp, and so at that year at camp. And so anyway, we had kind of started talking and obviously liked each other and stuff. And so I was staying over for a second week of camp to be a leader for our junior high camp. She was too young. She was 2 years younger than me. And so she was going home and then was going to go help lead at one of the children's camps. And so at the girls' camp. And so anyway, when she went home, she asked her dad, so she told me, I asked her out the last day of camp, and she said, well, I got to ask my dad. And I was like, okay. And so let that be or whatever. She went home, asked her dad. She didn't tell me this, but he initially said no. And so apparently they had a 1-year age gap rule, and I was 2 years older. But she didn't tell me. She let it be. And she went to go lead at camp. I was at junior high camp that week. Well, her brother, who's one of my really good friends now, has been my intern at the church for the last 4 years. He's about to graduate from Houston Christian. And so, but anyway, so he was coming to camp as a junior high student, and I'm there as a leader. Well, it just so happened that their parents got on to watch the live stream a couple of nights, and I got on stage, and I think I did either scripture or prayer one night, to open one of the services, and then another day I got up there to do some motions or something to a song. I don't know, something dumb on stage. But her parents were watching both times, and it was just enough brownie points that I was involved at camp and really involved at the church and stuff.
She's like, that's him.
That kind of because her mom kind of knew me from the church already, or knew who I was and stuff, but her dad didn't know who I was from Adam, and so that helped, and so they ended up telling her it was okay. And so
dad's always the main one.
Yeah,
you got to get the dad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so it was. But yeah, it was crazy. God used a live stream at a youth camp to help open the door to now my wife.
Thank you, technology.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't know where you'd be at.
Exactly.
No, that's good, man. That's an awesome story to be able to share with your kids and everything. Me and my wife, we met. So it's crazy because we met at a bar, and like I told you, one of my close friends, he had committed suicide. He was with me the night that I met my wife. And the whole reason that I met her was because him and another buddy of mine tried picking up my wife and her friend.
All right.
And they got shot down. And, and then, I mean, they're like you, tall, white guys, you would just assume that they're going to pick up a chick or something like that, and they get shot down. And so little Mexicano Charles swoops in and gives them,
it's the tats, man. That's what,
no tats at that time. Wait.
Okay. None?
No, wait. No, I had tattoos. Yeah, I had tattoos. That's what it was. It was the tattoos.
Yeah.
So, and we ended up we met at a bar. We were dancing and everything. And so I've told the story before, so I'm not going to get too much into it. But her family was, her mom had came from church at a younger age, and she went occasionally. Her dad and them didn't believe too much in church. So she never really attended church until Easter. She would go to Easter, Christmas, and that was it. Those were the only 2 times. And she wouldn't even go with her family. She would go with her friends from school and stuff. Yeah. I would go to church when, like I said, if my family was having an issue or something was going on or a holiday and stuff like that. But I knew church.
Yeah. It wasn't completely foreign.
It wasn't completely foreign. And we had those family members, aunts and uncles who were pillars of faith that were in our family as well, who we kind of, when something was going wrong, that's who we went to for prayer and stuff like that, and to talk to. And, even when we were younger, teenagers and stuff like that, your boyfriend broke up with you, your girlfriend broke up with you, my cousins would always go to them for, oh, what do I do? God's going to find the right one for you and stuff like that. And so that's how we grew up. And so me and my wife actually got to really experience the love and the full grace of God together. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was one of the biggest things that really set off our relationship, was the fact that she got to learn about God and His grace. I got to teach her what I knew, and then she got to witness God actually alter my life for the better. Because at the time that we met, I was a real heavy. I wouldn't say I was an alcoholic, but she probably would say that I was. But alcohol was a big part of my life at that time, and getting into trouble. Yeah. And the crazy thing was that her family, because they didn't go to church, it didn't matter how much my life was changing in church. I couldn't win those brownie points because to them, church wasn't anything.
Yeah, it didn't have any value.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so that, we go back to judging a book by its cover. Like, I'm here trying to better myself, but because they didn't believe in what I was believing in, it didn't mean anything to them. It held no value. But it even got to a point that, man, we had been dating. Let's see, we met in 2017, 2021. Man, she's going to get so upset that I got that wrong. But we get married, and in those years of us being together, living together, her dad was just like, you marry him, I'm not showing up to the wedding. Like, and we've been together. Like,
yeah, like it wasn't a surprise.
It wasn't. It wasn't like we just met and 6 months later we're gonna get married. Like, I understood the kind of thoughts and attitudes that her family had towards me, but her dad was just like, yeah, we're not showing up. And we prayed, and thank God that he altered his heart and he showed up and he gave her away at the wedding and stuff. And and our relationship is a lot healthier now. But it was almost that, even though my faith had grown so much and I had actually received so much from the church, the fact of this one thing that I wanted so bad, which was his approval, that I wasn't receiving, it was almost like, man, why am I even bothering? Like, because at that time, all I wanted was just to be my wife's husband. Like, that was what I earned for him. For her, it was, I want my dad to accept this man, and I wanted my wife to be happy for that. And dude, it got to a point where it was like, man, I got so tired of people judging me by the way I looked and for the life that I lived. I have 3 kids, 3 different mothers. My wife now, we have a kid together, and then, I have 2 kids from 2 previous relationships. And her family seeing that was just like, no, And it was like being able to finally get to them and understand, like, I'm not the same person who I was when those decisions were made, was a difficult thing, but it was so much more rewarding after all that time of trying and trying and trying and trying. And so I've always told myself that even with my daughter being in high school, like, as much as a dad wants to protect their daughter, like, I have to think about it so much that when she tells me, oh, yeah, me and my boyfriend, I'm like, what? You got a boyfriend? And she's like, yeah, and I got to be open-minded to it because I don't want to put off that same kind of reaction that I got from my father-in-law, And so the whole judging a book by its cover is a difficult thing even now as an adult. And even me going through the actual issues of being judged, I still find myself doing that to the people.
Yeah, it's hard not to turn around and do the same.
Very hard. And with social media, I see my daughter's on the track team. My daughter, she plays soccer, so she's athletic and she's around athletic boys.
Dudes,
and so I'm just like, who's
Can't
that
trust
guy?
him,
Who's that guy? Oh, he's a good guy. I'm like, nah. No, he's not. I don't believe it.
Well, and it's hard, right? Because, like, even in high school, I would have considered myself to be a good guy, but I think about, like, even as a good guy, there are things that aren't great, like about a teenage guy. Like, you know what I mean? And so, like,
we all know what that is.
Yeah, like of the guys, like, of all the ones to choose from, I felt like I was in the good category, but still, that is like, when I think about my daughter, I'm like, I still don't want you to be even around like 16-year-old me. Like, you know what I mean? And so there's a whole nother level of, like, trust, like, to that, and, like, it's hard. But
I'm glad that my daughter is the old, because I have 2 boys and I have my daughter, and I'm glad that my daughter's the older one, because I'm kind of like, I would have liked for my boys to be older to watch over her, but because,
like that protective older
but
brother,
because they're not together, I'm glad that I'm kind of like getting that whole issue and dealing with it now, so that when my boys grow up, I can just be like, society is like that now. Like, oh, boys grow up, you're not too worried about it. But man, I feel like even like with my 2 boys, I would be like, well, who are you dating? Like, what is she doing? What does she think? Because I want to raise my kids in church, and I want to raise my kids in a faith-filled home. And the last thing I want is for them to meet someone who's going to pull them away. And so that's always like a nervous feeling of mine. But again, like, I try my hardest not to judge and not to look at the situation in that way. I mean, my kids are still young, but it's still like, time flies. I mean, my daughter being in high school now, like, that time flew by so quick. And I just want to be able to give them the right kind of life to where they can make the right decision when it comes to their turn to decide.
Yeah.
And I mean, I give it up to people who work with youth, bro. Like, for real, like, the hat's off to you, because like you said, it's different when it's your kids.
Yeah.
And when you're given the life of someone else's kids, like, hey, you're supposed to be speaking life into my children.
Yeah.
That's got to be like,
yeah,
that's difficult.
Yeah, it is. Like, and I think in the beginning, like I said, I've been in the role that I've been in now for 7 years, and then I was able to serve in student ministry and like a couple of different internship opportunities before that. And so I've been in this type of role for a long time. And in the beginning, like, I think I took that weight a lot, like, as if like I'm supposed to be the primary spiritual influence in these kids' lives. But really, like, I think, and some of these kids don't come from Christian homes, so maybe I do end up in some way filling that role. But that's not God's design, right? Like, God's design is the parent to be the primary spiritual leader. Like, it absolutely takes other people pouring into it, and I think it's valuable what me and other student ministers do and stuff as far as pouring into the lives of teenagers. But I think the longer I've been doing it, the more value I've been seeing in pouring into parents and parents being able to pour into their own children as well. Because, like you talk about, like, instilling values that then they'll make the right choices. And so then, it doesn't undo or pull them away from God, right? Like, you're doing these things now that are going to hopefully set up what is their value and belief system and stuff, so that they can then teach that same thing to their kids. And so, I think that's, I get a couple hours a week with students, you know what I mean? And then whatever other time I can make to go be with them, which is becoming harder and harder right now that I have a 1.5-year-old daughter of my own. And like, and so, like, as my family responsibilities have grown, I have less and less time to be at 17 athletic events a week, you know what I mean, or whatever. And so, like, it used to be that way. You can ask my wife. I mean, we used to it felt like that's all we did. It was, I literally got a crossing guard gig at the district just so I could have a school ID to get into all these games, because it would have, like, literally we'd have gone broke paying to get into all these high school and junior high basketball and, football games and, track meets and whatever, volleyball. Like, it was just constant. But now, like, having a daughter, like, I can't do those things. And so, like, I think the longer I've done that, like, and I still go to some stuff, I just can't every single night of the week. And so, but realizing that, okay, I can't be the parent to every single one of these kids, so it's important that we pour into the parents, because that's the people that for the rest of their life are going to have some sort of say or role in their life. And while they're, and that's who they go home to every day. That's who, is getting that kind of chance to influence them on a level that I can't even scratch the surface of. And I think, too, having a daughter of my own now, too, I see that. And I don't ever want to take the role of it's somebody else's responsibility to teach my daughter what God would want, desire for her life. Like, that's the responsibility that God gave me and my wife. And
that's good, man. That's good. I think that with social media, we also see so much of, we talked about the highlight reel, like everyone just seeing like the best of what's going on. Yeah. And the whole, like I was talking about before, the comparison, people who don't go to church comparing themselves to people who do go to church, and people who do go to church comparing themselves to people who they believe are living better in the church. And I think a lot of that has to do with, the society and the way social media has altered the way we live and stuff. Is there anything that you would say to a parent, or that if a teenager who would listen, on how to set themselves up for understanding that that's not the way life always is? Like, what you see is not going to be the way your life is going to turn out, and don't assume that everyone's life is always better than yours.
Yeah, I think on some level they know, like, and that's the more I talk to teenagers too, like, and understand, like, I think they do know to some level that a lot of what they take in is artificial in a way, like, they long for something real. And so what I've found, instead of some like magic formula, is just to come back to God's word, like, on that stuff, and to try to lay that foundation, because God doesn't ever sugarcoat how our life's going to be following him anyway, right? And so to me, like, and that's, I guess, my biggest thing that I try to do for students in that place is, like, sure, I'm not even trying to fight the battle of keeping them off of social media and stuff because I can't control that. I'm not their parents anyway. And so, but they're going to take in all this information. But if you're truly like, if you're looking for truth, if you're looking for something real, like there's a source. God has given us something that is relevant to whatever question that you have in life right now. Like whatever it is that you're struggling with, there is somewhere in this book that speaks to that sort of thing. And so if you want to find truth, this is the place that you find it. And it's a hard thing, right? Because like you're trying to tell kids that something that was written 2,000 plus years ago is more relevant than what they're seeing on their phone that is updated by the minute, right? But the thing is like this is something that has stood the test of time. This is something that like we have seen the life-changing work of the scripture. Like we've seen the life-changing work of the gospel for thousands of years now, where like we're just now scratching the surface at seeing the honestly more negative effects than positive effects of what social media does to our minds. And so just trying to steer them back to that foundation that like, hey, whatever information that you're receiving, it needs to be being filtered through this lens of God's word. And so where I think sometimes it's the opposite. I think that where our culture gets backwards a lot of times is we start trying to digest the Bible through the lens of our culture instead of trying to digest our culture through the lens of the Bible and the filter of the Bible. And so that's an important thing. And that's something where, man, my time, I really do, like I joke about the money and stuff about HBU and stuff, but my time there was incredibly valuable in my spiritual walk because it made me dig deeper on a lot of the things that I believe and begin to create a more solid foundation. And one of the things too, like, just in a basic hermeneutics class, like I have a book that called Misreading Scripture Through Western Eyes. That was just a standard book. I think they still use it in a lot of the hermeneutics classes there. And so, but anyway, just kind of gave me a whole new perspective on what I need to like look at this book and what God has given us, His Word, in its context and what it actually says, and quit trying to put my American understanding of what God is trying to say and try to make it fit that, and just say, no, this is what God says, and then that's how. And then how do I apply it? How do I understand the culture around me? How do I understand what's happening through what is the truth here, and not trying to twist and mold the truth to fit what the culture. Yeah, because that's, I think, what a lot of people, there's a lot of people that claim to be Christians in our culture, but their version of Christianity is just really like what fits nicely within the culture. And so that's been something that I guess, and I kind of, this is not like a trademark term, but I call it like convenient Christianity or whatever. And that's like what I've been with for 7 years now or more with students, and really even going back to an internship the year before that, been kind of pounding home that idea that like that's not what God calls us to. Like there's His Word has truth that supersedes that goes over whatever our culture says is the standard. Like this is what God's Word says is truth, and that's the lens that we need to digest the rest of what we're seeing around us through.
No, that's good, because I know like at the beginning of my walk, I did that. Yeah, I definitely would alter what the Bible was saying for it to fit my life. And if it didn't, then I was like, oh, I need to hold off on this because I'm not understanding what the scripture says. When in reality, I did know. And it was telling me, I just didn't want to admit to myself, like, hey, it specifically tells you don't do this, don't do that. But in my mind, I'm like, nah, I think I'm reading it wrong. Let me come back to it.
Yeah. And as much as I know that's the truth, I even do that myself, right? At times, and have to check myself. Like, wait a second. Like, I know that it says that. Quit trying to like make the shortcut or the easy, and like find a loophole or whatever. But that's good.
And I think that's one of the things too, is that people who don't attend church or people who are looking in on a Christian lifestyle, they tend to get the idea that, oh, well, when I become a Christian, like life is going to be easy. Yeah. And so they almost like set themselves up for failure, because then they enter this walk and it's like, I'm actually having a more hard time than what I was before I even became a Christian. Like, what is this? I must be doing something wrong. Yeah. And I mean, that's not it. The way I always try to explain it to people is that being a Christian does not mean that you're not going to face these battles or that you're not going to face these storms, because you're either going in a storm, you're in the middle of a storm, or you're coming out of one. Yeah. The only difference is we're given this tool, a book, and we're given grace, and we're giving given love to help us get through all those storms that we're about to face.
Yeah.
Because it's doing it without him that's the hard part.
Yeah.
And we sometimes just don't even notice it because we're so caught up in today's society that we're just like, oh, this is just another struggle that everyone else deals with. But when you become a Christian, it's like, well, why am I dealing with this struggle anyways to begin with? Like, I gave my life to you. Like, why aren't you fixing it for me? And I think I know for like, at least most of like my family member who are teenagers and like my daughter and stuff, that's the kind of area where they're at right now, where it's like, okay, well, just because you go to church doesn't mean you're better than me and you know it, you know what you're doing. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just trying to let you know that God is the way and that the gospel is going to help you get through those hard times that you felt already and that you're going to feel, going forward.
Yeah, because I mean, it's something I think the older I've gotten to, like really trying to like understand, and even in Bible study that we just had at our house last night, I believe the passage came up like where Jesus talks about that it's better that he goes so that the helper can come. Like, and so this idea that like God has sent his spirit to dwell in us, like I always knew that, like, right, like growing up in church, but really in the last several years, really trying to like get myself to try to wrap my head around that, because I think it's still a hard thing to really understand that like the same power that raised Christ from the dead dwells within each of his followers. Like that's a crazy thing when you think about it. But I also think that like when we do start to understand that, like that's where like the hope of Christianity, like that's where like we can walk through this life and whatever has to come because we have this power that's much greater than us that is with us. Like that's like I've heard you talk about this like not wanting to go through these struggles without God. Like that's what it is, right? Like that now when we go through these struggles, we have God's Spirit in us. We have this community of believers, of other people who are filled with God's Spirit to walk through it with us, right? And so, you hear like at weddings, you'll hear this kind of thing too, that like, with two people and maybe in a community, it's even more than this, but like with two people that your joy is doubled and your sorrow is halved or whatever, that kind of like cliche, like little wedding saying. But like, I think there's some truth to that. And especially in like a church in the community of believers, because if you have all these people together filled with the Spirit, when you begin to walk through a really tough time, like you have those people to pick you up. Like you have those people like that are there to care for you, that are going to walk with you through that stuff. Like I couldn't imagine going through the things I went through as a kid, or even like, the tragedy that I was talking about, like with my friend who committed suicide, like without having God or godly people around me. Because even with the truth that I knew about God in the moment, if it weren't for godly people around me to remind me of that stuff, I still don't know how I would have made it through that time. And so like, I think that's where I think the importance of the community in the church is so important, and where that value comes from. And maybe that's why I guess I've never had that animosity towards the church, because for all of its flaws, right? Because we are a body of people who are flawed. I think there's been this value throughout my whole life of that community, of that people to be there for you. Like
it's very beneficial.
Yeah, like I see the beauty in God's design, the value in God's design for the church.
I think that's really good to understand and to keep close to you, because it's like I've told people before, like I've had people who struggled with like an illness or a loss or something, and they're just like, I just can't get through it. And, I'll be like, well, let me pray for you. And I pray for them, and they're just like, I thank you for praying, but it's just, I still like have this struggle. And I always tell them like, you may be struggling with your faith, but I know my God. Yeah. And I know that my faith is more than enough to help you get through what you're going through, you know? And it is, that community is such a big deal. I recently celebrated a birthday, and I had made a post on Facebook about the importance of community. Like every single person that was at my birthday was someone who I met at a church. Yeah. Like all those relationships were created at a church. And you hear those people say like, oh, I can find God in my living room. Yes, you can find God in your living room. You can find God at work. You can find God in the car on the way to work. I find him there every morning, you know. But there's something about the relationship that you create with other people that you just can't find anywhere else.
Yeah, because you can find God there, but you can't find the church that he created you for there. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you were created to be a part of something. Like, and so it's not, like, we worship in my living room all the time. Like, you know, we got a YouTube playlist that rolls worship music all the time, and we have that. My daughter will be, you know, she's 1.5. She doesn't necessarily know what she's doing, but she'll be raising her hands and stuff in there, and we're jumping around, and you know, we worship in our house, like we experience God there. But that's not all of it. That's not all of what God designed us for. Like there's real value in that, like being with other people.
That's good, man. Well, man, it was a pleasure getting to know you. It was a pleasure getting to hear your story. I thank you for coming, you know, onto the podcast and being vulnerable and everything. I know you got some big stuff going on.
Yeah.
I know that, you know, we're not actually just meeting each other for the first time, but we actually are going to be, I'm going to be on what you have now as a podcast. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we're kicking off. Radio Faith is starting another podcast, Sports News Relay, and so we're excited to get that started. I talked a little bit about my passion for sports, and it's been a huge part of my life, like since forever. Like people used to joke when I was a kid that I was born with some sort of ball in my hand. You know, I literally like. That's all I cared about when I was a kid. I did not watch cartoons. I was like Sports Center from like the time I was like 2 years old. And so like, so I'm excited. You know, we're going to get to kind of merge two of the most important things or favorite things in my life, both God and sports, and get to kind of talk about that and share that, and maybe open some doors for opportunities to connect and build community with people involved in athletics in our community and beyond, and awesome, and also be able to talk about all the stories that we all want to talk about, that we debate in our living rooms anyway, and with our friends, and so get to have some conversations, and so we're excited to kick that off. And
that's awesome, man. That's good. Let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Who's your football team?
I'm a Cowboys fan.
Hey, that's what I'm talking about. I'm gonna go ahead and give it right here. You hear that, George?
I'm a suffering Cowboys fan because I was born in 1993, and so. It is
88.
Yeah, so I like vaguely remember the last Super Bowl, but
man. So we're gonna have some good conversations.
Oh yeah, ready for it,
man. But I look forward to it. I think it's a really good thing. I think it's great. I'm excited to see what Radio Faith has. You know, I know that there's opportunities for more podcasts to come out, and I just think bringing God and bringing the gospel to the community, and not just a face-to-face, but people being able to listen to this, you know, on their drives to work or, you know, while at the gym and stuff like that. It's just such a great thing. I know people talk about, you know, old school church and old school this, but I mean, we have technology and we can use it for the good, for sure. Yeah,
I think it's an awesome way to kind of take things that people care about anyway and merge them with the church and with conversations that we'd have and be able to, have that with our community, and so I think it'll be a great time.
That's good, man. Do you mind praying us out?
Yeah, for sure, I could do that. Man, Father God, we thank you, God, for this opportunity, God, for this platform, God, that you've given us. God, we just ask, Lord, that you would continue, Lord, to bless both the efforts here on Saved and Tatted, God, that you would also be with, God, some new endeavors, Lord, that we have, Lord, that you would guide our steps, Lord, that we might honor and glorify you in every step that we take, God. Jesus. We love you. We thank you. It's in your holy and precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen, man. Thank you for coming on. Guys, please subscribe, like, share, and comment. Hope to see you back.
Hey, it's George again. At the beginning of this episode, I mentioned that Radio Faith is working towards launching 2 new shows this year. Radio Faith is a company that produces Christ-centered content that makes an impact at the intersection of the church and culture. Saved and Tatted moves that mission forward through the raw conversations that Charles has with his guests. These 2 new shows we're working on will provide the same type of space for these type of raw conversations, but in a more nuanced way. The first show will be about sports and the second will be about music. Both sports and music are a large part of cultures around the world. We want to provide digital content that engages these areas of interest and connects both sports fans and music fans to God. To stay up to date on when these shows will be released, subscribe to Saved and Tatted and then jump over to the Radio Faith YouTube channel and subscribe there as well. Thanks again for supporting us along the way. I hope you have a great day. God bless.